Yeah, go.
Hey, everybody. Welcome back to episode 2 of Set Up to Fail podcast brought to you by Ryan and Seth. Today, we are going to talk about the hot topic of AI readiness and go-to-market. There's been a lot of buzz. There's been Harvard studies that have come out recently on a lot of organizations failing to adopt AI in a multitude of facets. A lot of those tests have been related to go-to-market. I think what we want to talk about today in this podcast is kind of break down how organizations are set up to fail right now, from getting ready to implement AI into processes, into systems, into anything that's impacting the go-to-market structure. So that's the conversation today. Ryan, one of the things we were talking about is how do you get ready and what's the buckets you should think through? So why don't we start there, and then I think we can dovetail into different conversations. But as you think about AI readiness and some of the gaps that you're already seeing in conversations, what are those?
So I think as you think about, and I think we should maybe define like how we maybe bucket AI.
Yeah,
Um,
go
I
for it.
don't believe AI represents human replacement today. I think AI represents human complement today. I think AI represents human acceleration. I think AI represents probably some level of automation, step automation. I don't believe it can do process automation yet. So as we think of AI in those definitions, I think that's important. For that, when you think of LLMs in general, they are machines, very efficient, very fast machines. And the fuel for that machine is data. I think we've all heard ad nauseum how much data it takes to train these things, et cetera. Well, it's not just train them, it's actually an application as well. So if you don't give it the right information, it can't curate bespoke results for your organization, which is really what you want. So, and the reason that matters is I think many organizations have jumped into execution and adoption of AI without walking through the critical preparation steps to take advantage of it. So, what are some of those things that matter? I think first and foremost, having a dictionary of data, a definition of what the specific information means and what information is critical to your organization is an essential first step. Because if you're going to train this LLM, whether it be ChatGPT or otherwise, to give you information back, you need to tell it what that information means. So if you have a specific data field that denotes whether it's a customer or prospect, you need to arm it with that information. And so I think in many cases, that is one of the foundational pieces that is critical, missing, but is essential, is
Yeah.
just the definition of what information means what. And therefore, the LLM can consume that information and then start spitting back either additional back and forth prompts or some level of output that then you refine from there. So that's the first one. Why don't we just pause there?
Yeah, I mean, on the dictionary part, I think most organizations would say that, hey, I have defined definitions, I have that mapped out. I think in our experience working with a lot of organizations, that's usually false. There is some sort of documentation. It's usually discombobulated. It's not across the entire business, right? There's pockets of documentation. There's documentation of marketing metrics and input data that goes into Marketo and Salesforce or whatever the systems you are. Same thing for sales, and then that gets bifurcated and goes to CX, and then that's oftentimes the wild west of definitions. And I think commiserate with some of the people who own that, that's a lot of change that happens in there. So what I think I'm hearing from you is, hey, before you do anything outside of documenting what the expected outcome you want out of it is, the first thing is you have to get the foundational elements that can give you those answers ready to go. Is that a fair summarization of what you're talking about?
Yeah, I mean, I think you need to empower the system to understand your information. I think one of the reasons that I would say even organizations that say they do have it do not is because organizations have a slice of it. You'll have the sales slice, you'll have the SDR slice, you'll have the marketing slice. If you're trying to do organizational analysis, the organizational analysis is across the customer journey. And if the AI tool that you're using is looking at all customer journey data and you're not segmenting it, it's going to commingle a lead with an account, with a churned account. You know what I'm saying? Like, it can get really squishy and really sloppy really fast if it isn't organizationally defined. And so I think even though some people might have a data dictionary, it's often a departmental data dictionary. It's not a customer journey data dictionary. So you still need to add the layer of saying, okay, well, here are the key data fields that we use in sales versus in business development versus in marketing, et cetera. But even that, I don't often, I couldn't tell you an example of where I've walked into an organization that had a fully built out, accurate data dictionary. It generally takes a half a dozen
That's good.
conversations. And then you even sit in those rooms and one executive says that's true, and one executive says that's false about the same thing. So that's an inherent problem. And so I think
Well,
it's,
especially with organizations going on now, there's so much change that's happened in leadership that every leader has a new perspective on a metric, a new perspective on process, a new perspective on what something should be, and then there's a lack of, I think, maybe ownership that goes into the changes in the documentation, or what we call a change log, like what has happened, what was it before, and what is it now. And that component, I think, really takes, it's a time suck for a lot of people, and they don't think of it as valuable. The interesting thing on the maybe pulling in the data thread a little bit, because outside of documenting the key inputs that are going to give you a positive output, what are some of the things that people could think through from the data side to get ready as well in the enrichment piece? Because I think that's also a gap. If you ask people even simple things about, like, what are the core titles that somebody goes after and why, and you're trying to get and use that information to go make a targeting from an ICP standpoint with an AI tool, there's a lot of tools that will talk about the enrichment of your database. How do you think through that? Because I think there's tools that talk about enriching database to empower that kind of data dictionary. I think that you still need to define what inputs equal a positive output. But outside of that, how do you think about those tools, even like a Clay, for example, that talks a lot about the enrichment process to kind of give you some more of those structured answers, so that it's not as gray as it might be based on your database?
no, I think you make a good point. I think there's the data dictionary component of it, which is the definitions of, if I'm trying to identify a customer, what field do I use for that? I think what you're talking about starts to dip into what I would call data standardization, which is, okay, what is the consistent set of information that we as an organization consume from our system of record to use for different purposes, whether it's email writing, whether it's QBR analysis, whatever it may be. So I think on the data enrichment side, again, I think that documentation of, when we say an account, for an example, and let's just say from an account management point of view, right? From an account management point of view, what information do we want to keep current, accurate, and aware of as it pertains to that organization who's a customer of ours? So things like annual revenue, things like number of locations, I don't know, different products they sell, whatever might be relevant to you. I think first and foremost, as an organization, you need to define what information is interesting. I think the benefit of a lot of these AI tools is the breadth of data that they have access to is enormous, but not all information is created equal from your organization's point of view. So depending on what you sell, one piece of information could be highly valuable. One piece of information can be a waste of space. And so I think defining, when you say enriching that account, what information is pertinent to your organization that you care about. And then maybe secondarily, I think from a training standpoint for the LLMs, is giving credible sources where you trust that information coming from. I think that one of the big things that I've seen in data enrichment that it can do is it can give you a lot of bad data really quickly. And so if
Yeah.
you're not giving it a trustworthy source, I can Google annual revenue for insert company. As a private company, that number could range from $1 to $1 billion, and it could be 5,000% incorrect. So if you don't structure it in such a way that you're getting the information you care about and from a trustworthy source, that could become just a muddying of your data really, really efficiently.
Yeah, that's a good point. I think that there's parts of this that, if you take the mindset of, like, hey, step one is like get the structure ready to be ingested somewhere. And then I think part of that is like, okay, that's probably understood from the broader group. how you do that, how you approach that, what level of variance are we comfortable with of it not being accurate? You know, you're in like the 80 percentile. Is that what you want it to be? And you're comfortable with a 20% gap. I think there is some of that probably people need to be comfortable with. Like you're never going to, no data enrichment tool or anything is always going to be, you know, you should stab for like directionally accurate to the best of your abilities, but there's always going to be a lack in that. Taking that aside for a second and saying that's the foundational layer that, you know, as you're getting ready to do that go to market, you really need to spend quality amount of time there, probably much more than people are giving credit to. Outside of that, let's say you have that foundational layer good. How do you think through the application of it now? Because there's a bunch of, let's call it knowledge base AIs that just consolidate all these different knowledge bases and allow you to search through it, which is something like a Glean potentially. And then there's other tools that are maybe more specific through go to market that could give you answers into automation for a role, answers into making a rep's job easier around maybe a prep document. What are the applications that people should think through as they get ready for this? Because I think there's so much and there's so much like the art of the possible here that people really struggle with the, hey, what are the things that are probably realistic to do versus, you know, the full on automation that I'm forgetting the company's name now. But like they have like an AI tool on their website that's supposed to be an AI robot that can have an interactive conversation with you. Forget the name of it, but anyhow, how do you think through that? Because I think that's again foundational element understood. I think the advice here is spend way more time than you're comfortable with here and get that right before you just start pumping information into a database. And then from there, what's the applications that you think are realistic to accomplish right now versus the, I think a little bit of the happy years on full automation.
I think there's a natural complexity maturity curve that exists. So I think where the tools are exceptionally skilled is data consumption and data synthesis as it pertains to understanding a company, understanding the state of a business, understanding the structure of a business, understanding trends, because so much of that can be pulled from publicly available data and it is accurate. So, you know, how has this company grown or not grown over the last 3 to 5 years? You can find stuff like that pretty easily and it's pretty accurate. So I think, as I would put it, like the spectrum on the easy side, that is probably, you know, 90+% accurate and effective today would be account research, meeting preparation, call preparation, demo preparation, the consumption of information, and go help me get in the mind of this business, this person, understand what I think they care about, what's going on in their company, so I can talk intelligently and relevantly to them. You absolutely can do that today at a very high level. And I think AI tools make that really, really strong. To just show the scope of things, I think automating a human being out of interaction with a client is like the other end of that spectrum. I don't think it's anywhere close to that, nor will it be anytime soon. I think as you increment kind of in that direction, I do think there is some follow up automation that you can do. You know, in this circumstance, do that. In that circumstance, do this, as it
Yeah.
pertains to business development, sales, customer success, those kind of things. I think,
Let's talk about that for a second. Everybody and their mother has felt these automated emails that are structured terribly. Like, where is that even at? You know, you see all these examples. I
so
see a bunch.
I
They're
think it
so
can do
bad.
it. I think it can do it
Yeah.
on its own.
Okay.
Can it do it well on its own? No. I think it is okay-ish on the logic, but I think I would defer to an experienced human on the logic. I think on self-created copy, mediocre. Editing copy, really good.
Yeah.
So if you're
Agreed.
creating a cadence as an example, the frequency of the cadence you should do, not the machine. The copy of the cadence, you should do the first draft. You should have it edit you. I think that's there. I think in some of the basic automation, like if they ask for this, give them that, I think it can do. Determining whether you should respond that way to an SVP versus a senior manager, it's not there. It absolutely is not there. I
Well,
think it does some high level personalization, but it is not going to be as effective as someone who can go, okay, this person's a 3-time SVP. They've been in the industry for 20 years. I'm going to talk differently to that person than a senior director who was in college 2 years ago and is probably just trying to gather some information for their boss.
Yeah. I think there's part of that. It goes back to your original premise, though, which for some reason, I think through this AI readiness conversation that we've had and other discussions, is there's still a misunderstanding of the inputs that need to be successful. So if you're going to write the good cadence, you to educate an SDR or any tool to write a good cadence, you have to give it good inputs, which are like, what are the signals that you should look for to say that this is either positive or negative? And if it is one way or the other, that means that's a positive thing for us to go after. And so little organizations have people that do that or can think through that, that they're just giving regurgitated nonsense around, hey, I'm going after this type of persona. Here's the general things that this persona cares about. And that gets put into the automation tool. And then, yeah, like obviously you're going to get a bad output out of that. Like if you're giving it generic, you have to teach it to think. And I think that's part of the missing, I think, piece in an organization right now is there's not enough people, again, working on the business. And I think working on the business would be in this area to go, hey, what are the real signals why people come to us? What are the real pains that I can either find from a research or from a public database to be able to do that? I think people just skip that step and go right to the implementation of it.
Yeah, I think you're 100% right. I also think that you need to take the time as an organization to really define what you're trying to achieve. You should not release strategy to the machine. It's not ready. And so you need to tell it, I'm looking for a duck. I want it to quack. I want it to swim in the water. And I want it to be white, light brown, gray. What, you know what I'm saying? Like you've got to give it some boundaries. I think that's where a lot of the frustration I think in AI has been is they're like, well, I flipped the switch. It's on. Why isn't it doing stuff? And it's like, it's not built for that. It's like you need to drive. Like a Ferrari is an incredible machine. It doesn't drive itself. You still have to drive it. It doesn't mean it's any less of a machine. It just means it requires some inputs to go, I want to go left, I want to go right. So I think that's a good point, is really helping to equip the strategy of what you're doing with the complement of AI, but not like I flip a switch and now my strategy is automated. I think you're going to universally fail in those kind of scenarios. The challenge with that is, as you and I have experienced, is very few organizations have that ready to go. They have.
Well, but here's the question: who's going to do that? Is that a product is that a product
That's the
marketer
other.
doing that? Is that your sales leader doing that? Is that your rev ops person doing that? Who does
Well,
that? And I think the
the
ownership
first
of this
problem is you don't have it. The second problem is you internally might struggle to put it together, or maybe worse, disagree on it. So the product person says this, the marketing person says that, the salesperson says that, and then it's like, okay, well, the machine can't like moderate us. What do we want? And so I think that's another key thing.
That's probably why all the tests are going back to that Harvard study that came out around all these tests that are failing. I think that's a lot of what's happening. Has been that there's been so much unnecessary pressure on organizations to adopt it without anybody really fully owning it. Like anything within an organization, if nobody owns it, nothing's going to happen. And I
Well,
think
that
there's been pockets of people testing it in different areas, whether it's automation, whether it's knowledge bases that can kind of help condense time frame. I think all of those are good things that you should go and think through. But again, it kind of goes back to like, where do you start? Do you start with just a knowledge based tool like a Glean that can just kind of consolidate different sources? Again, but that's bad information in is going to give you a bad answer out. So it's a tricky place for a lot of executives right now. I empathize
I
with a lot of
agree.
people.
I think it's very challenging. It's even more challenging if you let the tail wag the dog, right? You do not buy
Dog's wagging
technology
the tail,
you do not buy technology and let technology tell you how to adopt a business outcome for you. What you need to define a business outcome and determine what technology helps deliver said business outcome. I think that's one of the fundamental mistakes is people are buying tech with the assumption the tech will deliver an outcome that they may or may not have even formally defined. So
Oh, they haven't formally defined it. But let's extrapolate this out for a knowledge base example for a second. There's a lot I think personally there's a lot of benefit to a consolidated knowledge base organization. So a rep or an
agreed.
SDR, they don't have to chase information, right? Part of that though is I don't think there's people in that room having those conversations that understand the outputs they actually want, which is what does the consolidation of a knowledge base do for you? Like if you ask yourself that, what does it really do?
Well, or even
Does it
even
give
more
you speed?
basically, is the knowledge base we have accurate?
Which every organization's, it's probably 9 times out of 10, it's not because nobody owns it because there's documents and Notion and all these different places. And it's like, nobody owns that as no consolidation. So I guess taking that out, for example, if that's maybe an easier tool to adopt, because it's probably, I would say, the most ready to adopt in terms of, it's a knowledge base. LLMs can do that very well. And the consolidation of information, it's an easier thing than automation or, replacement. As you like, but how do you get there? Because like, let's say the output is like, well, I'll take a practical example. I feel like my sales team is chasing product information, policy information, etc. I might have that in a high spot Notion, blah blah blah, right? What do you do? Like, what's your next steps on that? It can't like I don't think it can just be I'm not going to test this because I don't have an output, but like, how do you nail down the output? I think that's maybe a good conversation for us to have.
I mean, I think using the mindset of it being a solution, you need to really thoroughly and effectively define the problem. So if you have so in your example, you have a knowledge base of product information that is for whatever reason not getting in the hands or not getting utilized by your sales team. First question you got to ask is why? Do they not have access to it? Is it not easy to consume? Like, what is the problem you're trying to solve? I think throwing over ChatGPT on top of your knowledge base, if no one's going to use it, doesn't solve the problem. And maybe the issue isn't the fact that, the knowledge base isn't sufficient or robust enough or whatever. It's that your salespeople don't think product knowledge is the thing they need. So there's other issues involved. I actually think and we went through this obviously in our career as consultants, working with a lot of people going, well, I want more sales. Okay, well, why aren't you getting more sales? Well, I need more salespeople. Maybe, or maybe you need better salespeople, or maybe you need better business development. So I think you got to really diagnose the problem. I actually think this is what we're describing right now is the process documentation. What is actually happening? Why is it a problem? And what can we even do about it? That specific thing. If you don't have someone architecting or supervising that process, you can automate bad stuff really efficiently, but you may
Well,
spend a
so
bunch of money and get no result.
But I think the reason why I brought that up is because it goes back to I think the fundamental point we're talking about, which is the data readiness to be able to get ready to ingest AI in any part of your business, especially from the go-to-market standpoint. And I think part of what I think the root cause of this, and maybe we can riff on this for a second, is the fact that nobody owns documentation within the business. People own documentation externally. There's product documentation, there's help docs, there's all this other stuff, but nobody owns internal documentation. And I think because as an organization, there's just so many silos, whether it's product, marketing, et cetera, and you have all this different documentation, there's different templates, there's different things. And I think part of what probably needs to happen and should have happened a long time ago is somebody needs to consolidate all the information and go, what are the templates that we actually use to operate our business, consolidate that information. And then I think that gives you a starting place to go use a knowledge base like Glean of going, hey, anything outside of these 20 or 30 templates that we have across the business does not need to be put into the model. And we're going to use this as a source of truth. And people are going to update this source of truth. And
But
that
let's
way it's consistent.
highlight why that problem exists. My thesis on why that problem exists is there is no one in that seat. And the reason there's no one in that seat is it
What
doesn't
in what seat?
exist.
In documentation seat or
No, I think it's a different seat. I actually think it technically would be an operations role, but I think it's more formally like a go-to-market architect. Because when you think about the average organization, there are very few people, CRO, CEO, COO, might be the three of them, that ever look at full customer journey. Everyone else is one slice of that pie. The problem is what we're describing is a whole customer journey problem and a whole customer journey solution. And so if you don't have someone with that broad purview, they're coming in with their little piece of pie point of view, and it's going to be inaccurate, not purposefully, but just because they don't have the purview wide enough to understand the ecosystem. And so I think to your point, the reason a lot of this does not exist is I don't think you have a butt in that seat. I don't think you have someone who's looking at it from that point of view.
Yeah, I think there's like some organizations have like a PMO function, which kind of masquerades as that in some cases. But I don't think it's kind of it touches on different issues, and I think to your point, there isn't really a role for that right now,
Well, but
and
then, but
there
then
isn't
the other
anybody
key
holding
thing
accountable on
is,
that.
let's say you have a PMO, some organizations do. Are you going to trust that person to make domain specific recommendations to an AI tool in terms of process and strategy?
Oh, I think I was more less about the training the AI model and what you want to do, more of like who owns the internal step one of just getting consolidation of information and or templates or like what do we use?
Right. No, no, no. It is different. But what I'm saying is, aren't they intimately dependent?
Yes.
Like I can organize the papers into the different file folders, but if I can't understand what file folder A and file folder B is, you didn't really move the needle. So I think that's
Yeah.
part of the problem is
Yeah.
like you have to have the operational organization, which is what you're describing, which I think PMO is probably well suited for. But then you really need someone above that going, but that's good or bad information, or that's correct or incorrect, or that's
Yeah.
outdated. There's that whole qualitative analysis of that that's on top of it that I think for the lion's share of organizations doesn't exist. And I think that's the gap in why a lot of these things are failing is you don't have someone architecting, orchestrating, coordinating, structuring all that nuts and bolts stuff to plug into the machine. They just turn the machine on and just spitting crap everywhere. And
Well,
it's
I
like,
think
that doesn't
this is
help.
like to me, this is a broader example of what I saw with ABM in the early days. Is everybody wanted to, ABM was the hot topic. We have to do it. We got to get our business, which frankly, going after targeted accounts has been around for generations. However, the approach to using a tool to automate that is kind of a newer thing in the last 15, 20 years. But as part of that got released, that was all going, well, everybody needs to do this. Sales needs to be on the same page. Marketing needs to be on the same page. Whoever's looking at our ICP and what we're going after is be on the same page. And what you saw was an orchestrated mess. Because to your point, there wasn't somebody taking a step back. Rightfully so, it was an orchestrated mess. And part of the problem that keeps coming up and will continue to persist with this is there isn't enough people working on the business. Everybody's working in the business. And then if you give a leader 4 more projects on top of their day to day, you're going to get a half assed effort.
Well,
Like, what do you expect to
well,
happen?
what you're experiencing now is
And these are
a,
dangerous half assed efforts now. Like, this isn't just an
yeah,
ABM exercise. This is like
no, no, no.
organization decision exercises.
No, that's a key point. And I think when you look at the organizations who've cut themselves to be so lean, they've become dangerously lean in many respects, not the least of which is experience. And so now you have a person who has a role. They probably now have 2 side gigs because those people got terminated because the company wanted to save some cost. And so now they're masquerading outside of their depth, outside of their experience in important decision making situations, and it's dangerous. And so I think what has happened in SaaS is we had a massive experience drain as the elder group matured out, retired and left. And the training and development for that next round did not exist. It wasn't there. We saw it firsthand with hundreds of companies. You put people in leadership, walk me through the training they have to be in their leadership role. The answer was zero. They were a good rep. Now they're a manager. That manager became a VP in like 18 months, had never been trained to be manager, never mind VP. And all of a sudden they're making strategic decisions, having no
Well,
expertise in
and
doing that.
you're pushing strategic business decisions on oftentimes frontline managers. whether it's in sales or CX, and you're going, well, where should we focus and what should we go after? And it's like those people don't have a chance to take a step back and going like, what's actually working, what's not, or doing cohort analysis across the business.
Well,
Like
and so extrapolate,
it's a foolish exercise.
but extrapolate out the implications of that. So you take that situation where you have inexperienced leaders leading a bunch of people in very strategic, critical roles. Then plug in Chat GBT on steroids, pumping them full of all kinds of ideas, all kinds of strategies, all kinds of different content that can generate at a blink of an eye. And where's the quality control of is that right or wrong? That same person. So now what you've given is an amateur a bazooka when they've never been trained to shoot anything, and they're just spraying nonsense. And so what's crazy to me is that despite AI, and I think AI's initial application is outbound outreach, is at least where I saw it applied the most. Outreach should be world-class level today, should it not? You have more resources, more tools, more capability, more technology, all that. It is worse. Outreach is absolutely, unequivocally worse today than it was a year ago, 5 years ago, 10 years ago. I don't care from what organization. I get hundreds and hundreds of prospecting messages a day. They are terrible. So is that AI's fault? I think the answer is no. I think it is what we're just describing is there's a void of expertise that says you can automate crap or you can automate excellence. But someone has to tell the system, is this good or is this bad? And if there is no one in that seat, you should assume it's crap.
Yeah. I mean, it's you can I'll take a golf analogy, right? If you give, technology is way more advanced than it ever was. Doesn't mean golfers get better. Maybe they do. Maybe their misses are a little bit better, but that doesn't necessarily mean they're going to shoot better. And I think that's part of the problem within organizations is for some reason we forget to apply that to business and just go, if we do more, we're going to be better. And it's like, I grew up on the adage of like, bad practice equals bad results. Like you have to practice the good things. You have to think through the applications of that. I think maybe let's turn it as we kind of wrap up here into like if we're a business right now, we talked about, setting up the data dictionary. I think the practical application that I'm hearing from you is find somebody in the organization, whether it's RevOps, et cetera, who knows the business and knows the structure of it. Give them a little bit less responsibility. Give them partially this. Maybe it's half their job. Maybe it's a quarter, whatever. Maybe, hell, if you can give them full, give it to them full. And saying your job is to consolidate information and make sure that any process that we run is documented, agreed to, and signed off on. And then any changes that take place would do that. If you can have somebody in a RevOps organization or ops or whatever it is to do that, I think that's step one. And then the other, kind of ancillary piece that I think you touched on that would be interesting is maybe take a leader that you feel like has an inclination to look at data a little bit more and train them. Train them to understand the business. Train them to take a step back. Send them to a Winning by Design course in revenue architecture. Give them the abilities to think critically and take some people who are leaders who are inclined to that mindset and train them up. Get some people in to train them up because you're not going to miraculously work on the business, and executives 9 times out of 10 are too far removed to truly make intimate decisions. And you want those people in the business bringing that back up to the executive level to say, hey, here's the information I'm seeing, the data that I'm seeing. Here's some tests that we should go run that could go help us. And then those are the people that can kind of give you that orchestration potentially on that AI piece to make sure that, what's getting fed into that is good. That's a very high level practical example. But I think, is there anything else that you pop in your head that people can start to apply?
I think those are some good points. I think get yourself some expertise, whether it's consultants like us, whether it's consulting firms, whether it's past people that are retired. Get some gray hairs in the room. Honestly, get some people that have some scar tissue that can test your assumptions. Many of these decisions are multi-million-dollar decisions. What does $100,000 to a consultant matter? Get someone in the room that can help you decide why you're doing what you're doing, not just what to do, but why. I think that's one of the key criteria that you would think about all this. The readiness for AI is you need to validate that the direction you're providing is right. So when you say your ICP, like we said, is X, look at your last 20 deals. Was it? And if it isn't, then that's an important discussion as an organization you to have long before you worry about automation, but just understanding what's working, what's not, why, really understanding your own business in what's happening, I think is essential, because when you think about where AI is today, I think it's amplification. So what you want to amplify is excellence. So go find that. Where are we successful? Why do people buy us? Who's really good at selling it? What is it that they say? Like really try to figure out, if you were to, kind of copy someone or a process or a customer and say, I'd love to have 50 of these. Well, what is that? Define what that is. I think that exercise would be exponentially valuable, and then marry that with some expertise in the room from an outside third party point of view that maybe isn't drinking the Kool-Aid, that maybe is going to ask you some difficult questions that maybe rattle things, but might help you sharpen and refine this focus. Because
Yeah.
I think what AI provides is a capacity bump. It doesn't provide a clarity bump. You can do more with it. I
Not
don't
yet.
think it on its own does it better. And so
Not
you've got to
yet.
find out what good looks like. Then I think you can enable tools to do that at scale, or do more of it, or do it with the same people
I think you can.
faster.
I think you can orchestrate it. I think maybe that's part of what you also spend time on outside of taking some tests, like implementing a knowledge base for the sales team or for the go to market organizations. I think that's a good test. I think the other test is like what you said is it's never going to be unproductive to answer the question why. Why does somebody buy? Why does somebody stay around? Why does somebody continue to expand with us? But so few organizations actually spend the time to do that. And it's like, it's this exercise they do once a year. That should be a quarterly exercise at a minimum that the right people are ingrained in. And I think if you continually do that, I think you can use and leverage AI tools to get a better output to that for sure. And then as you keep iterating and changing the why examples, like you can start to drill down a little bit more into that. So
Yeah.
there's a,
Well,
there's
and
a
I
lot
think
of practical ways to go approach that.
for sure. And I think the other side benefit of this is, by going through this practice, you will have greater clarity in the organization. You will have more effective communication amongst each other. You will have more effective reporting and analytics, because when you define this stuff, you can run clean, simple, clear, accurate reports. And then maybe timely wise, this matters now, is you should be using this information to build your plan for 26. What is my ICP? How many of them are there? What are they worth to us? All validated by your performance. That is how you should build your plan. So, since everyone's thinking about Q4 and budgeting for next year, this is a timely exercise that is a wild host of benefits to the organization, both before and after AI.
Yeah, agreed. Well, why don't we wrap up here? I think as we're thinking through this, we'll continue to have discussions around AI readiness, how you get through, the probably bumpy road that's ahead for probably the next 12 to 18 months at a minimum. With any change, there's a lot of negative impact that you should be wary of. And, I think there is part of this that scares me within organizations is there's change fatigue that we've seen at scale. And so if you continue to try to do these things and they fail miserably, there's a trust barrier that you're going to have to go through. And so you should be very careful not just rush things out, because once you lose that trust barrier with people, as we've both seen, it takes a long time to build that trust back with the field. So I think the first thing is be cautious how you do it. Think through the data component first. Make sure that structural stuff is right. Get somebody to document that. Make sure you're going through the processes, and then really spend adequate amount of time on the output of what you want it to be, and then what that variance you're comfortable with, because it's never going to be 100% right. But
And for the people
um,
that have made investments, don't throw out the kitchen sink. I think take a step back, take a look at the infrastructure. There's a very good chance you can optimize, refine, and improve what you have done. So I think there's a lot of people that feel, I think, probably burned by some of these investments. I think before you count it as zero, I don't think that's the right approach. I think the right approach is maybe take a step or two back and then build back into whatever investments you've made. There's a high likelihood you can get better results, but you skipped a step that you need to go back to enable that to be successful.
yeah, 100%. Okay. Well, tune in for next episode coming shortly. AI readiness. It's time to get ready. See you guys.